You have exactly 72 hours to pay, $2,500, or I'll have you arrested. Those were the exact words that psycho HOA president screamed at my wife as she waved some ridiculous violation notice in her face. And no, this wasn't over drugs crime or even property damage. It was because my wife's car was parked 6 inches over the garage line on our own property. But what Karen didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, is that the woman she was threatening wasn't some scared suburban pushover. My wife, Charlotte Evans, just gave her a soft smile and said, "Thank you for the notice. I'll take care of it." That's when I knew Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. We live in this upscale California development called Willow Creek Estates. Think white fences, strict noise curfews, and a neighborhood newsletter, longer than some law books, and Karen. She runs the HOA like a dictator who thinks she's above the law. But here's the twist, Charlotte is the law, literally. And what Karen did next, calling the sheriff to make an example of Charlotte. That was the last mistake she'd ever make in a position of power. Part 2. Turning point. Muktiel 1.582 Bajoviet. Karen's first strike came wrapped in pink paper with the HOA logo stamped at the top. A $50 fine for planting tulips instead of the approved rose variety in our front yard. My wife Charlotte just smiled, walked inside, paid it online, and said nothing. Me, I was livid. It's flowers, I argued, on our property. But Charlotte, ever calm, responded, let her feel powerful. She's showing her hand early. That should have been the first red flag. A week later came the mailbox, fine $125 for being 1.5 inches taller than community regulation. Karen had used a measuring tape, a literal measuring tape. Again, Charlotte paid. Again, she smiled. Karen mistook silence for surrender. But I knew better. Charlotte's a judge, a state judge. She uses her maiden name, Collins, in court, and Evans at home. None of our neighbors had a clue who she really was. To them, she was just a lovely, soft-spoken wife of some sales guy. Karen, on the other hand, was a walking warning label with a clipboard. She ruled Willow Creek Estates with obsessive precision. After being fired from her IRS job for hostile conduct, she found a new empire to control us. Her life was spreadsheets, policies, and citations. We were her new tax evaders. The escalation was slow but deliberate. Like Karen was building a case not just for rule violations, but for personal domination. The next fine was for our trash bins being visible from the street for longer than 30 minutes after pickup. $300. Charlotte didn't flinch. Let her dig her own hole, she said. At this point, I was the one unraveling. Why are you letting her bully us? I asked one night as she folded laundry. Charlotte looked up and gave me a smile I'd only ever seen inside a courtroom. The kind of smile that makes lawyers sweat. Because if I play this right, I won't just end her reign, she said softly. I'll make sure it never happens again to anyone here. And that's when it hit me. Charlotte wasn't being passive. She was building something. Quietly. Strategically. Like every fine was another brick in her wall Karen was constructing around herself. Without realizing, Charlotte held the blueprint. Things escalated on a windy Thursday morning. I watched from our porch as Karen strutted up the driveway, clipboard in hand, like she was storming Normandy. She handed Charlotte a thick stack of papers, complete with time-stamped photos and precise measurements. This, Karen announced, is your final violation notice. You've repeatedly broken community guidelines. And now your Tesla is parked 6 inches over the edge of your designated driveway zone. Charlotte blinked. 6 inches. Karen's lips curled into a triumphant grin. Yes. And that infraction, combined with your past offenses, has triggered an automatic community fine of $2,500. I started to speak, but Charlotte gently touched my arm. Thank you for the notice, she said calmly. I'll take care of it. Karen turned smug as ever. If payment isn't made in 72 hours, the HOA reserves the right to pursue legal enforcement, including sheriff involvement. As she walked away, I turned to Charlotte. She can't seriously believe that's enforceable. Charlotte folded the notice slowly. Her eyes didn't show anger. They showed calculation. I think it's time, she said. Time for what, I asked. For Karen to learn what real authority looks like, that afternoon, Charlotte disappeared into her home office and didn't come out for 3 hours. When she finally emerged, she was holding a manila folder and had that same quiet intensity I'd seen right before some of her biggest courtroom victories. She sat me down and opened the folder. Inside were photos printed, HOA emails, violation notices, every single interaction she'd ever had with Karen, all dated categorized and cross-referenced with HOA bylaws. She's so obsessed with power. Charlotte said flipping to a spreadsheet, she documents her own abuse of it. This isn't a folder, it's a roadmap to her undoing. Over the next few days, Charlotte reached out quietly to a few neighbours. Just casual conversations during dog walks or at the mailbox. What I thought were just neighbourly chats turned out to be critical witness statements. Mrs. Holloway, 2 doors down, had been fined $900 for painting her shutters non-standard beige. A veteran on the next street over got penalised for flying his American flag at a non-HOA approved angle. A single mum with 3 kids paid $600 for hanging a wind chime too loud during quiet hours. Each of them had stayed silent, too scared or tired to fight. But Charlotte, she wasn't just collecting sympathy. She was assembling a case. Karen, meanwhile, interpreted Charlotte's quiet as validation. And that made her reckless. Monday morning, she returned clipboard heavier than ever and announced that, in addition to the $500 fine, Charlotte would be required to write a formal letter of apology to every household in Willow Creek Estates. All 141 of them. You'll personalize each one, Karen explained, and include an admission of your pattern of defiance and a commitment to future compliance. Charlotte nodded, taking the template Karen handed her. Of course, should they be typed or handwritten? Handwritten, Karen said with glee. It shows sincerity. That night I watched Charlotte sit at the dining table and begin writing letters, each one a work of strategic elegance. The wording was graceful, the tone humble, but the phrasing legal gold. She took full responsibility for perceived violations, expressed hope for reconciliation, and referred repeatedly to community unity under equitable governance. But what she was really doing was building a chain of evidence proof of excessive demands, public shaming, and administrative harassment. By the end of the week, she'd logged 32 hours of handwritten apologies. She photographed each one time-stamped and stored them in the folder. Karen's next demand: door-to-door visits to personally express remorse to 5 selected households, ones she claimed were deeply affected by Charlotte's actions. Charlotte agreed, and she brought cookies. Every neighbour she visited was won over within minutes. They weren't angry. They were confused as to why anyone would need to apologise over a driveway. By the end of her rounds, 3 of the 5 neighbours had turned fully against Karen, one even offering to write a letter in Charlotte's defence. Karen, unaware that her army was crumbling, kept pressing. She scheduled a mandatory community re-education session for Charlotte. 2 hours of HOA compliance training in the clubhouse. Charlotte sat through it all, taking notes, while Karen lectured about acceptable mailbox designs, grass height limits, and appropriate seasonal decor colours. She thinks she's training me, Charlotte told me afterward. But she's handing me the evidence I need on a platter. And then came the last straw. Karen slapped an additional $1,000 fee on Charlotte's account, an administrative penalty for the complexity of her infractions. Charlotte asked, "Can you put that in writing?" Karen, smug as ever, did, in her own handwriting, and signed it. That was the final piece. The trap was built. Karen had just walked in. Charlotte looked at me that night with calm, icy certainty. Saturday's public HOA meeting, that's where it all ends. Part 3, unexpected event. Muktio 1.582. Badjao Viet. Saturday arrived like the opening scene of a courtroom thriller. The community clubhouse, usually reserved for holiday potlucks and dull board meetings, looked more like a makeshift tribunal. Karen had outdone herself. There was a podium at the front of the room, a massive projector screen, lit up with a PowerPoint titled Accountability and Community Standards Enforcement. The case of Charlotte Evans. On both sides of the screen were trifold display boards littered with photos, maps, and notes, basically a full-blown HOA CSI exhibit. Karen stood near the front, greeting arriving residents like she was the hostess of a neighborhood intervention. Over 70 neighbors filled the folding chairs. Some looked curious, others uncomfortable, and a few Karen's loyalists seemed ready to burn someone at the stake. Then Charlotte walked in. No fanfare, no dramatics. She wore a navy blue blazer and simple flats. She carried a leather folio and a small notepad. If anyone expected drama or defiance, they were disappointed. She looked like she was about to take notes at a business seminar. Karen started the presentation with the smug energy of someone about to give a TED Talk on tyranny. Fellow residents, she began, we are gathered to discuss the persistent non-compliance of one of our own and the appropriate disciplinary actions that must follow. For the next 47 minutes, yes, I counted, Karen laid out her case. She had time-stamped photos of Charlotte's tulips, a diagram of the mailbox with a red arrow pointing to the excess height, satellite images of the trash bins visible for 34 minutes post-collection, a detailed graphic showing Charlotte's car exceeding the driveway boundary by 6.3 inches. She even had testimonials, vaguely written letters, from a few cherry-picked neighbors claiming Charlotte's disregard for rules created stress in the community. And then came a big finale, a breakdown of the financial penalties totaling $3,500 and her list of demands. 1, a public apology Karen read from her paper. 2, immediate payment of all fines. 3, a 6-month probationary status, during which any violation, no matter how small, will result in automatic escalation. Then she looked at Charlotte, waiting for the meltdown. But Charlotte just stood up, walked calmly to the front of the room and said, "Thank you for your thoroughness, Ms. Walsh. I appreciate the effort." She then addressed the crowd. "I take full responsibility for the infractions outlined this evening. I appreciate your patience and Karen's documentation. Before I proceed, I would like to ask for a brief clarification, something minor but important for legal understanding." She opened her folio and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Could you please provide in writing the specific legal authority under which the HOA is allowed to impose these fines and enforce them through police action or criminal penalty?" Karen didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." With a smirk, she scribbled down several sentences on the form and proudly read them aloud before signing. The HOA maintains legal jurisdiction to enforce all bylaws through local law enforcement and reserves the right to involve the sheriff for collection or arrest in the case of non-payment. She even had 2 witnesses, board members, sign the document. Charlotte read it slowly. Then she folded it, placed it into her folio and said, "Thank you. This will be extremely helpful." Karen beamed like she'd won, but the trap had just snapped shut. The room started to murmur. People shifted in their seats, whispering, exchanging glances. Some sensed that Charlotte wasn't rattled. She wasn't cornered. She was documenting. Karen tried to regain the room. "Now that the resident, has accepted responsibility, we can move forward with implementing sanctions." Charlotte raised one hand. "Actually," she said gently, "before that, I think the sheriff may have a few things to say." You could have heard a pin drop. The door opened and in stepped Sheriff Daniel Rhodes, the same sheriff Karen had claimed would enforce compliance. He walked slowly, scanning the room. Karen froze. Sheriff Rhodes, Charlotte said, her voice calm but full of subtle power. "Thank you for coming. As we discussed earlier, I wanted you to hear the enforcement claims firsthand." Karen recovered quickly, waving him toward the front. "Sheriff, this is the resident I filed the formal complaint about. She refuses to pay legally assessed fines, as the signed statement confirms." "Ms. Walsh," Sheriff Rhodes interrupted, "I need to stop you right there." He pulled out the very statement she'd written, her own claim, that the HOA could order arrests for unpaid fines. "Did you write this?" he asked. Karen puffed up. "Of course, that's standard HOA enforcement." "Actually, no," Rhodes said. "It's not. What you've written here constitutes a false claim of legal authority. HOAs are civil entities. You can't threaten criminal enforcement, much less claim the sheriff's department acts on your behalf without a court order." Karen paled. Charlotte stepped forward and spoke not to Karen, but to the entire room. "My name is Judge Charlotte Collins," she announced, using her court name for the first time in public. "I serve in the Superior Court of California. And over the past several months, I've documented a pattern of misconduct by this HOA, particularly by its president." Gasps, whispers turned into shocked exclamations. She's a judge, someone said. Karen's face collapsed. Charlotte continued. This isn't just about tulips and parking violations. It's about intimidation, abuse of power, and false representation of legal authority, all of which are criminal offences under both state and federal statutes. Rhodes nodded. We're now conducting a formal investigation. If any of you have experienced similar threats or unlawful fines, please remain after the meeting to provide statements. Karen's legs wobbled. A neighbour stood. She fined me $700 for using solar lights without permission. Another, she said my wreath was culturally inappropriate, and cited me $250. Charlotte let it all unfold. Every story, every injustice poured out like a dam finally bursting. Karen tried to interject, but no one was listening anymore. She had lost control. The tyrant was dethroned, and Charlotte, calm, composed, and strategic, hadn't raised her voice once. She had simply let the truth speak. Part 4, change in perspective. Muktio 15082. But Jalviet. After the meeting, Karen didn't speak a word. She walked out of the clubhouse with her signature clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. But her eyes shattered. The predator had become prey. Neighbors gathered around Charlotte in clusters, some shaken, some relieved, and all curious. You're really a judge, one man asked. Yes, Charlotte replied calmly. And I became one because people like Karen think they're untouchable. What followed in the next 24 hours was something out of a political scandal. HOA board members began resigning one by one. 3 of them had quietly admitted to Charlotte that they'd been bullied or manipulated by Karen, coerced into approving policies they didn't understand or agree with. Charlotte never gloated. She never even raised her voice. Instead, she set up a simple table outside our garage the next morning, with a sign that read, HOA concerns, let's talk. It was meant to be informal, just a way for neighbors to share their stories. But within hours, it looked like a neighborhood town hall. An elderly couple brought receipts showing over $1 and $200 in bogus seasonal decor violations. A single dad described how Karen threatened to report him to CPS because his kids left bikes on the lawn. A teenage girl burst into tears saying Karen had yelled at her for selling lemonade without a permit. Charlotte listened to every story, took notes, asked questions. She didn't make promises, but she gave people something far more powerful: validation. And that's when something began to shift, not just in Karen, but in the entire neighborhood. Because after all the outrage, once the truth had been laid bare, what everyone really wanted was healing. The next Monday, Karen knocked on our door. For the first time since we'd moved into Willow Creek Estates, she wasn't holding a clipboard. She looked different, not broken, not angry, just small. Charlotte answered, Ms. Walsh. Karen fidgeted, eyes darting to the ground. I came to apologize. Charlotte didn't respond right away. She waited. I know what I did, Karen said. I abused my position. I let my bitterness turn into control. And I hurt people. Her voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. I see it now. Charlotte studied her for a moment, then opened the door wider. Come in. They sat at the kitchen table for over an hour. I didn't hear every word, but I saw something extraordinary. Karen breaking down, not in fear, but in self-awareness. She spoke about losing her job at the IRS, how she'd spent her life being feared, not respected, how the HOA role made her feel important again, but she took it too far. Charlotte listened without judgment. Then she said, You've done real harm, Karen. But the fact that you're sitting here proves you're capable of change. Karen nodded. What do I do now? Charlotte slid a piece of paper across the table. I wrote this last night. It's a restorative agreement, an alternative to formal prosecution. It outlines steps for repair, not punishment. Karen's hands shook as she read it. Resign immediately from all HOA roles. Repay improper fines. Public apology letters. Community service. Anger management therapy. And a 5-year bar from any leadership positions. Karen looked up. You really wrote this? Instead of pressing charges. Charlotte smiled. Justice and mercy can exist in the same sentence. That day, Karen signed it. The news spread quickly. Charlotte didn't make a grand announcement, but word of Karen's decision moved faster than wildfire. By lunchtime, the neighborhood Facebook group, usually filled with lost pet alerts and lawn care tips, was overflowing with reactions. Some were skeptical, others cautiously optimistic, but the overwhelming response was relief. Karen delivered handwritten apologies within the week. Each one began with, "I was wrong, and I want to make it right." One by one, the neighbors she had once antagonized began to see her differently. Not as a tyrant, but as a woman who had fallen hard and was trying genuinely to stand back up. Her first community service assignment was helping Mr. Benton, an 84-year-old widower, clean out his garage. He hadn't been able to lift anything over 10 pounds in years. Karen showed up in sneakers and jeans, her hair tied back, no clipboard in sight. When I drove by that afternoon, I saw them laughing. Mr. Benton handing her lemonade, Karen wiping dust off an old fishing rod, like she was touching something sacred. It wasn't performative, it was transformation in motion. She helped repaint the community benches she'd once fined people for scratching. She organized groceries for elderly residents. She even fixed a broken ramp for a disabled teen down the block. But the real change happened during a Thursday HOA town hall. This time, Charlotte led the meeting not as president, but as a volunteer legal advisor. Karen sat in the back, not speaking, just listening. A young mother raised her hand. "Why should we trust that anything's really changed?" Karen stood slowly. "Because I know what I look like in that mirror," she said. And it scared me more than anything you could say. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply told the truth. That was the night the community started to believe her redemption was real. We weren't just witnessing change. We were part of it. And as for Charlotte, she never once said, "I told you so." She just kept building quietly, deliberately, a new system for our neighborhood. One rooted in transparency, shared leadership and compassion. And it worked. Willow Creek Estates wasn't just repaired. It was reborn. With Karen stepping down and the neighborhood slowly healing, a fresh chapter began for Willow Creek Estates. The HOA board was a shell of its former self, but Charlotte saw this as a chance and opportunity to build something better from the ashes. She didn't want to just replace one dictator with another. She wanted a real community. Charlotte reached out to neighbors she'd met during the conflict. She invited them to a casual gathering at our home, pizza, drinks, and honest conversation. The turnout surprised us all. Over 40 residents showed up, spanning every age and background. Retirees, young families, single professionals, all hungry to have a voice. The first meeting was messy. Voices clashed, frustrations spilled out, and decades of mistrust bubbled to the surface. But Charlotte navigated the chaos with the calm of a seasoned judge. "We're here to listen," she said firmly, "to build rules that serve everyone, not just a few." They drafted a list of community concerns: clearer communication, fair enforcement, transparency in decisions, and most importantly, respect for neighbors. Charlotte offered her expertise pro bono to review HOA bylaws. Together, they identified outdated rules, removed vague language, and set clear, reasonable standards. She helped establish a democratic election process for board members, ensuring no one person held unchecked power again. A new committee formed a diverse group tasked with reviewing complaints before any penalties could be issued. No more knee-jerk fines, no more power trips. The transformation was rapid. Monthly meetings became forums for genuine discussion and collaboration. Instead of a dreaded obligation, neighbors started looking forward to him. Events like community cleanups, block parties, and holiday celebrations were revived. The neighborhood felt alive again. Property values soared, not because of strict enforcement, but because people cared again. Because this was no longer a place ruled by fear, but a place built on trust. Charlotte's role shifted from quiet outsider to beloved community leader, though she never sought the spotlight. She simply showed up, listened, advised, and empowered. Karen, too, began her own healing. The community service had done more than repair her reputation. It rebuilt her sense of purpose. Together, the old adversaries created a new legacy, one where power was shared, not hoarded, where justice was tempered with mercy, where neighbors became friends. Willow Creek Estates was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a home. The weeks following the HOA overhaul became a test of character for everyone involved. Charlotte showed a side of herself few had seen before. Beneath the judge's calm exterior was a woman deeply committed to justice, but also to healing. She took the time to mentor new board members, guiding them through their responsibilities with patience and wisdom. No longer was she just enforcing rules, she was nurturing a community. Karen's transformation, meanwhile, was perhaps the most remarkable of all. The woman who once wielded power like a weapon had learned to use it as a tool for good. Community service had taught her lessons no court could deliver. Grocery shopping for neighbors, fixing ramps, organizing events, it was humbling. She began volunteering regularly at the local senior center, where she was known for her gentle demeanor and willingness to listen. Old grudges began to fade. Neighbors who once avoided her now greeted her with cautious smiles. Karen also embraced therapy, attending anger management sessions, mandated by her agreement. She spoke openly about her struggles with control and self-worth, and slowly began to rebuild her identity outside of authority. Charlotte often checked in, offering support without judgment, sometimes tough love but always genuine care. At one neighborhood, BBQ Karen shared a moment that summed up her growth. I was so afraid of being powerless, she admitted I didn't see how much I was hurting myself and others. Charlotte nodded. True strength comes from knowing when to let go. That journey wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, moments of old tensions flaring. But they faced them honestly. The community rallied behind the idea that growth is a process, not an event. As the seasons changed, Willow Creek Estates blossomed not just in flowers or property values, but in spirit. Neighbors began volunteering for local causes, supporting each other through hardships and celebrating successes together. The HOA's new motto, painted on a mural at the clubhouse entrance, captured the transformation perfectly. Together we thrive. Charlotte and Karen, once adversaries locked in a bitter fight, had become unlikely allies in building a better home for all. Their story was no longer about conflict. It was about redemption, resilience, and the power of community. The final chapter of this story wasn't just about Karen and Charlotte. It was about the entire community of Willow Creek Estates. What started as a simple dispute over parking and flower colors turned into a powerful lesson in justice, patience, and humanity. Neighbors who once feared confrontation now stood together. Those who had felt powerless found their voices. The HOA board meetings transformed from battlegrounds into brainstorming sessions. Charlotte's quiet strength and unwavering commitment inspired others to step up, not just in Willow Creek Estates, but in neighboring communities facing similar challenges. Her story spread, reminding people everywhere that real power doesn't shout. It listens, waits, and acts with precision. Karen's redemption showed that even those who lose their way can find a new path if given the chance and if they're willing to take it. Willow Creek Estates became a shining example of what's possible when justice is balanced with mercy and leadership is rooted in service rather than control. The neighborhood hosted its first annual community festival, drawing families from miles around. There were games, food trucks, music, and laughter. Karen and Charlotte stood side by side, not as enemies, but as partners in a shared vision. I never thought I'd be here, Karen admitted, watching children run by. Charlotte smiled. Neither did I, but here we are. Their journey had come full circle, from conflict to cooperation, from fear to friendship. And as the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, it illuminated not just houses but hearts. This wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a community reborn, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the belief that even the most broken systems can be fixed one person at a time. The story of Charlotte and Karen teaches us a timeless truth. True power lies not in domination, but in patience, wisdom, and compassion. It's easy to be loud, to intimidate, or to demand compliance. But those approaches breed fear, resentment, and eventual rebellion. Charlotte's quiet strength and strategic calm show that sometimes the best way to fight injustice is not through confrontation, but through careful, deliberate action. She documented, listened, and waited for the right moment to act. Karen's journey reminds us that people can change if given the chance. Even those who misuse authority can find redemption when held accountable with both firmness and mercy. This balance of justice and compassion is what builds communities that don't just survive but thrive. If you're dealing with difficult people or unjust situations in your own community, remember Charlotte's approach. Stay calm. Document everything. Build your case with facts, not emotion. Reach out to allies quietly and be patient. Seek to understand the root of the conflict and look for ways to heal, not just punish. When it's time to act, do so with clarity and confidence, knowing your cause is just. And if you find yourself in a position of authority, use that power to serve and uplift, not to control or intimidate. Real leadership inspires respect, trust, and lasting change.